Let's make planting this year's garden a lot easier with the Planter app. This app is packed full of features. It has companion and combative planting, which are indicated by green and red circles. It has a simple drag and drop interface. It has 80 plus plants and thousands of varieties. All the info is needed to grow veggies, including when to start seeds, transplant, and harvest, the ability to create custom plants and varieties, a growing guide with in-depth articles to supplement the quick info in the app, not to mention that you can view it and use it both on your PC and on your mobile device, so you can always be planting your garden on the go. This app is used in my garden year-round to plan the upcoming seasons, reference the last year's seasons so I know when to rotate, and it also helps me to learn more about companion planting using the visual cues. When you create your garden, it's going to be based on the dimensions, and each block is going to be a square foot. I've had a lot of fun using this app, and the Planter app, which is spelled Planter, is available in your app store on both Google and Apple. So what are you waiting for? Get out there and plan your garden, and use the link below to get a discount on the Planter app.
To have a good harvest, one must plant good seeds, and must also use the right kind of fertilizer. The carrots have grown large and firm. How good they will taste.
So I was just out tinkering with something, Batavia, and I had the worst possible thing happen to me. I had fish fertilizer explode all over me. It was gross. So, which is going to lead us in today's discussion, which is all about how a garden evolves or evolving gardens. So, should be pretty interesting. And I will remember the fish fertilizer going into my mouth as I speak about this. It was awful.
Oh, I was actually going to raise you, but I'll share anyway. It doesn't beat you though. So some of y'all may have picked up on I've extended my growing area for seedlings to an upstairs room, and it is an upstairs bedroom. And I had a bit of fish and seaweed fertilizer that I mixed up yesterday, and I didn't use it all, so I just had it laying in the pan. So, I went on about my day. And this morning, when I got up from the couch that I fell asleep on and came upstairs to get my day started, I was like, what is that? Oh, no. So now that smell is all throughout the top floor.
It's
and
a
it's
brutal.
a small house, so it's, yeah, there's no hiding from it.
Yeah, it's brutal. But, the way and that's a perfect example, too, how, gardens are evolving. So, the way this is going down is, you start off one way as a gardener, but then as you develop and further your expectations more and more in your experience, your garden's going to evolve. And I guess the big question behind all of this is, should we embrace it or fight it? I think that's something we should think about while we talk about it, because it has its pros and cons.
Yeah. Well, I think we're for sure saying that, I'm saying for sure that you don't find a way and then never change. I don't think that that's productive, so there has to be rooms for some change, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I know people that do start one way and never change, and that's okay. If you've made your garden and you're like, hey, this is what I like and that's it, you be you, live your best life. But
nope, you're doing it wrong. Nope.
No, that's it. Just end the story. And there you go. You heard it from Batavia. All right, we'll see you guys next week. But when I started my garden, I guess we should go into the history of our gardens a little bit on this one. So my first garden looked like one raised bed. It was a perfect square, and like 2 5-gallon buckets and just like a regular pot. And so other than expanding and diversity and stuff like that, things started to change in the future. So how about you? How did your first garden look?
It was a kind of dirt patch, 30 feet by 4 feet along the fence line in my backyard, period. Like I don't even know if I had tomato cages. I must have later that season. but very low key when it came to garden tools. I had a shovel, maybe I had a hoe, like that basically was it.
I had a hoe just because I felt like I needed a hoe. I didn't know how to use it. So, yeah. And I mean, and if you go fast forward, now let's just do a huge time jump to today. I mean, how many garden beds do you have now? How many tools do you have now? Stuff like that. And the same here. And so, like this year, I'm evolving yet again into something a little bit different, and which, I was, when the fish fertilizer blew up on me, I was testing out a new fertilizer injector I got, which injects the fertilizer into the water line. And it was like, I read the directions and it said, you need to have a backflow preventer installed and a pressure valve. And I said, I don't need that shit. Those was my exact words as I sat there. And it said that a water timer can be used as a backflow preventer. So I was like, all right. So I went to go check and it wasn't working right. And when I went to go unscrew it, I was like, I'll just unscrew it a little bit and release the pressure. Well, no, it was like full blown, like immediate release. But that's kind of the, evolving process for me is different techniques and fertilizing and stuff like that. And so this is something that I'm trying to play with this year. And obviously I'm trying to inject the fish fertilizer directly to the roots. Pros and cons of it, I don't know yet. I can tell you one con, it gets nasty real quick.
Yeah. I mean, When you brought that piece up, when you described this injector, my first thought was fancy.
Yeah.
And my second thought is like, gosh, I don't want to be this. I don't want to be the person that has, this tool and that tool and this method and that method. And while I'm not, injecting fertilizer, I am this person, right?
In your own right, in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how did I become this person?
Right.
And right, wrong, or indifferent, it's hard to back away from, kind of the way that you garden. Like, I was thinking to myself, like, how could I continue to find satisfaction in the way I gardened in 2008, that first year?
And the way you did garden?
In the way I did garden. So could I basically say, like, kind of back to the basics, go back to year 2000? I mean, the structures are the structures to one degree, but could you go back and just, again, find happiness in gardening in that same way? Like, if you tried to peel back things, uncomplicate things, minimize, as you like to say, the friction.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, truth be told, the fertilizer injector is just because the garden has grown to the size it has. So, fertilizing regimen where it takes me, a couple hours to, do my liquid fertilizer or whatever. This is just an automatic type situation, 5 minutes to set up and walk away. In theory, I haven't mastered it yet. I'm sure somebody out there has, and God bless you, I'm working my way there. But, I think that's part of it is the evolving process is, getting that bigger garden to the size that you want and you feel comfortable you can handle. And I think that's the big thing. But it doesn't just go to that. I mean, you can talk about different plants that you plant. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And if you introduce the idea of, for me in my area, how many years I garden with strictly annuals for vegetables, like no perennials in sight. I think mint was probably the first one I stumbled across and just didn't realize, like a peppermint, that it was it comes back.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't go away and it will take over. So, like, I think one of the big steps is varieties. Once you start, dipping in your toes into different varieties and stuff like that. And I mean, what's a better example than a tomato? I know we always talk about tomatoes, but they're dear in love. But I mean, how many different varieties of tomatoes are there to grow? Do you know?
I believe hundreds, if not more. Like, I don't know if it's at the thousands.
I'm going to ask the doctor.
You're Googling it, yeah.
10,000.
There you have it.
Yeah, well, that's Wikipedia, so who knows, but I'm not going to dig too deep. But yeah, 10,000 varieties of tomatoes. That's crazy. So on the Backyard Gardens community garden on Facebook page, which you should join if you'd like. I posted a question, and it was I wasn't very clear about the question. So my parents, they have always grown Better Boy tomatoes, always. Mm-hmm. And I posted the question, and I was like, what's so great about Better Boy tomatoes? It's the only thing my parents will grow. And the question really is, like, they told me, they're like, you can give us a tomato plant, but we're only going to grow Better Boys. And they've never grown anything else. And it's one of those things where, like, they're totally satisfied with that. I think it's one of those things you can get at the stores, are very easy to come by, stuff like that, get the plants. So I actually went out and bought myself some seeds because I was like, I want to know what's so great about a Better Boy. But they haven't taken that step necessarily to look into it, and they don't care to. At this point in their lives, like, I'm kind of waiting. I'm like, all right, here we go. This is the year. Now, they've done it with other things, but when it comes to them tomatoes, boy, they don't even care. And anytime you give them a red tomato, like, yeah, this is a good Better Boy. I'm like, man, that ain't no Better Boy. That's a Homesteader or something. He's like, no, that's a Better Boy. So you can't tell them nothing.
The big round, like, I would have never called it this 15 years ago, but the big round slicer, it's just the red tomato, a big red tomato.
Yeah.
Right. I think sometimes beefsteak gets lumped in with Better Boys when it comes to, like, when I used to go to the, to your Home Depots and your Lowe's and buy a tomato plant, like, I was just looking for a big tomato. Yeah. That's what I wanted to grow, a big red tomato.
Right. And I think you said that the key word too is, like, I would have never said this, but slicer. Mm-hmm. Like, a lot of people that don't garden or are new to it, they don't know the difference that there's a slicer tomato. There's a plum tomato. There's, everybody knows there's a cherry tomato, but, like, what's a slicer? You know what I mean? Like, it's just crazy. So once you start learning about that, then you can crack open. I mean, look, they got 9,999 more varieties to get through. So I'm gonna try and trick them into growing one. But yeah, look at this Better Boy tomato. This is good. See how this one grows.
But there's also a made up mind too. Like, a part of their enjoyment is based on their understanding that it's Better Boy.
Yeah.
So
it's the varieties are a big one too, and I would encourage people. I mean, I think for me, that's a big thing about gardening is having that opportunity to grow those different varieties of certain vegetables that you know and love. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it also complicates things, I think. You know that I'm team that.
Yeah.
Let me just be very clear, because there's some people that may be new. Welcome. And so for those that are not new, I want to try it. I want to try it all, the curious gardener in me. But then I also recognize that sometimes I'm biting off more than I can chew.
That's terrible. That was terrible. And it does make a complication, but sometimes a variety can fix a certain issue you have with growing a certain vegetable. If I could be any more vague, that would be great. But, if you want to grow squash, right, but you don't have enough room, well, they now have squash that grow upright. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say this. I've seen them, and they don't really grow upright, but they have a more upright profile, saving more space. So, then you have higher producers and lower producers and stuff like that. There's, disease resistance and all kinds of stuff you can really get into the weeds with. So it's something that you can definitely, work to your advantage inside of a garden.
So I have this approach that says, let me figure the thing out before I expand, right? So let me figure out if I'm growing cucumbers for the first time, I'm going to pick a cucumber variety and grow it. Mm-hmm. And, like, do I feel like I got my hands around it? Like, do I know how to grow a cucumber? And once the answer is yes, in my mind, then it's okay. Yeah, you can, like, instead of a, slicer for cucumbers, maybe I grow a pickling cucumber, right? Like, I try to have some level of discipline. It doesn't always work, but that's kind of like my general approach. Mm-hmm. If I go back to, like, inserting new varieties, like, what makes me want to grow a different variety? There are a handful of vegetables where it's looking at that curiosity, like, oh, I wonder how that tastes.
Right.
Very seldom as I wondered how that grows, right? But I wonder how that taste moves me from variety 1 to 2 to 3 and so on. But then there's also, to your point about the zucchini, in more recent years, it's this particular variety has been problematic for me, or this vegetable has been problematic for me. I've read or heard or seen that this other variety is less prone to insert the problem.
Right.
Right. It may be more easier to grow in my area, so it's almost like you move to a different variety based on some problem solving, attempt.
It's funny. I was watching a video the other day, and a guy is growing Brussels sprouts, and he said that over the years he's tried to grow many varieties, and this year was successful for him. And he said he had grown Catskill Brussels sprouts in the past. Mm-hmm. And he was like, man, they're just pitiful. They just will not grow for me here. And it was interesting because it was like, that was a moment for me when I thought about it. And I was like, that's exactly when I would switch varieties. Mm-hmm. When either I see something or I read something or by accident, I don't know. And then like I try a different variety. I'm like, well, this one did way better. And so I'm constantly trying different things to get, it's like you're almost in search of like the perfect seed for your garden. And it can be climate that can, cause these issues too. There's supposedly bolt resistant lettuces and stuff like that are meant to grow in warmer, not hot, but warmer temperatures that in certain areas you need that won't do good in other areas. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Which is why the dynamic of the show is so good, because I grow in zone 8A and Miss Batavia grows in 6A. I had to get it right.
I appreciate you getting it right. But I think that sometimes we are quickly dismissing a thing, maybe even incorrectly.
What is that?
Like you said, it doesn't grow well in my area. Like, can one gardener really dictate that? I mean, can that be like, kind of a full on, yes, this is the truth, this is it?
Well, I think after years of trial and error and, communicating with other people in your area, I think that it can, in fact, you can make that decision that like, this probably isn't the best variety for here, or I need to just branch out and find something different. So I think that does help with that. You know what I mean? And I mean, a lot of people start out too in this same discussion is like, I want to grow, I don't care what I grow. I just want to grow the food. And they're getting like hybrid seeds. And then they learn about heirlooms and stuff like that. And they're like, well, I want to start growing heirlooms. And at the same time, like you want to grow heirlooms a lot, but the question becomes, what's the purpose? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, what's the purpose in growing the heirloom? Is it because it's sexy sounding and it's old timey and it's preserving history? Is it because you want to save the seeds and have them true? Or is it because you read that it's better to grow them? When in fact, like there's nothing wrong with growing a hybrid seed. Yeah. The only real downfall would be something like, saving the seed. You're not going to get the true parent plant.
Yeah, there was a time when I shared on this podcast, it's probably at least 2 years ago now, where I wanted to transition to purchase more heirloom seeds for the goal of, not for the nostalgia, but for the goal of, seed saving and being more true to the actual plant, for the seeds I'm going to save. And that didn't last long. I mean, the temptation for purchasing non-heirloom seeds, the varieties, I can't get past it. And interestingly enough, I have kind of lucked into, I didn't even realize these were heirlooms too.
Well, that's part of it too, is sometimes you don't even realize.
Yeah. And just for the record, I've had a lot of success saving non-heirloom seeds, saving hybrid seeds, and then them producing. Am I comparing, year 1 to year 2, the actual plant and or the fruit it produces? No. But for my purpose.
Right.
I'm satisfied with it.
Exactly. Well, and you might be losing some of the qualities of the original plant, but it doesn't mean it's not going to produce anything. It's just not going to...
Or that's not going to taste good.
Yeah, it doesn't mean any of that. So there's a whole nother episode in that in itself, which I think is a valid discussion to have, because for a long time, hybrids have been kind of gassed upon. It's like I remember, what is this? There's this one fruit company out of Florida years ago, and I saw a post, and I know I've said this on the show before, but for the newer listeners, and they had all these crazy looking fruits, and they were just like old heirloom fruits, and usually the heirlooms are the ones that look weird, they're different, and I mean, you look through, they had hundreds and hundreds of comments, and it was like GMO, 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 and it wasn't GMO, it wasn't anything crazy, it was just an old heirloom variety that you would never get at a grocery store. You probably wouldn't even get it at a farmer's market. You would just find it, somebody had the seeds and this is what this company did. So it's just kind of like this overall, bad idea about what these seeds are and what these fruits are when you look at them. So, and then that's another way that you can evolve though, is by, testing out different things to grow as far as like heirlooms, hybrids, organic versus non-organic, I mean, did you ever use like synthetic fertilizers or just not really care about going organic? Or have you always just kind of tried to be as much organic as possible?
No, I never had, in the early years, there was never this conscious bit of like growing organically. I intentionally didn't like go and buy herbicides or pesticides or any type of fertilizer even, so what I was adding to my garden was very minimal. Right. So kind of, again, by default, some of my practices were organic because I just wasn't doing anything. So that was conscious, but not to like, kind of say I'm gardening organically. And I think it's probably, if no one had ever mentioned it to me, I probably wouldn't kind of use it as a label of sorts, which, I rarely do, this. But I don't think there's anything wrong with those that shout it from the mountaintops, But yeah, I mean, I think that the more you learn, the more you adjust, right? And so the more you learn, the more you either, welcome a thing that you're going to do, like the more I learned about the value of kind of living things growing from living things, that introduced me to compost. Actually, a girlfriend of mine introduced me to compost on the heels of me having a poor year with a new garden bed. And she asked, "Oh, what are you using for compost?" And I'm like, "Nothing."
What's compost?
Yeah, right. No, I kind of put it in a box and said, my fear will never lead me to. And she recommended a compost that I still use today. The Moo Newer. They don't sponsor the show, but it's just fun saying.
Yeah.
And so yeah, but then it's okay, I trust her, this is my garden, but I trust her. And so I started looking a little bit more, since again, I don't have to create the compost. I can buy it. Starting to understand more of the value of it. Right. And so that definitely was an evolution as far as me as a gardener, and became a common practice for me,
It's funny. I went through the same thing where I didn't know what compost was, but let me rephrase it. I knew what it was. I didn't know the benefits of it, but I knew that it had to go into the garden to some extent, and I knew that I could make it. And so at one point, I think I made compost for like 4 years and never used like a drop of it. And I didn't even turn it. I just kind of kept piling, like cold composting, just kept putting stuff on there. And I would still buy bags of compost and put it on because I didn't understand, but I knew that at that time it was something that was really important for whatever reason. And to be completely honest, at this point, it's like I feel like there's a lot of pros and cons to using it. But the more you dive into this, the more you start looking into it, and you can start making these decisions for yourself, as far as like, should I make my compost? Should I, buy it? How much should I add? All that stuff. But it's just kind of that evolution process where it's like each year I step more and more into it. And so I love making compost. This year, I'm not adding any of my compost to my garden, or if I do, it's going to be very little. So, there is that.
Why is that?
So if you want to really get into it real quick, I got a soil test 2 years ago. And when I got the results back, the guy was like, "You're extremely high in organic matter." And I was like, what does that mean? I was like, isn't that good? And he's like, well, it's good and it's not good. And so over the year last year, I noticed that my soil was drying out a lot and it would become crumbly. And that's a good tall tale sign that you're using too much compost. So I'm backed off and I topped off my bed with topsoil this year to try and rebalance that. So, it's like, I'm keep making it. And then next year I'll have a lot more, but I'm not actively using it. So I'm basically, for the most part going to cold compost this year. Which will take a lot of pressure off of me this summer because I hate turning a compost pile in the summer. It's the worst.
I'll have to go back and look at my pictures and videos. I'm pretty sure I topped off my front yard beds and my, I'm going to say maybe all of my beds with compost last year.
You topped them all off with it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
But the reason why I bring it up, because if I didn't, I definitely want to do it this year. But that should be, it'd be interesting. I've mentioned this on a previous episode. On a few different episodes, so I still haven't done it. I'm really curious now, since I kind of the bright side in my mind of not, managing the beds, not putting them to rest last year. I grew in them last year. Let's see where we're at for a starting point for the growing season, going forward and getting a soil test, which would be a couple of different soil tests. I don't know if I've talked to you about this, which a soil test was something that 10 years ago I would have never even thought of.
Yeah.
Right.
Not even an option.
No, I mean, didn't even know that was a thing. Right. And so kind of the front yard has a certain soil makeup, generally speaking. And then the cage maybe has a certain soil makeup, and then kind of those raised beds on the patio, which probably I won't get tested. So I'll probably have like 2 different samples. And there's a price point per sample. That's the reason why I'm not sending in 16 samples.
Right.
But I'd be interested in knowing, after a growing season, after the garden's been dormant for however many months, now what is this soil life like?
Yeah.
Well,
we should.
I got to giddy up too, man, because I'm like a few weeks off of being able to plant potentially.
Well, so like my state does soil tests for free, and I can give them as many samples as I want within a certain time period. So if you break that time period, then it's like $2 a sample. But if you don't have that, there is an affiliate link below for Soil Kit where they test. You send off and test your soil and stuff like that. They give you a discount. So that's something that's new as well. Fairly new, is like places like that, like independent places coming up that are known about. My grandfather back in the 80s, he used to take his soil to the college and ask him to test it. And they were like, what? And he's like, well, I want to know what's in my soil. And they're like, really? Nobody does this. And so he would try to adjust. I don't know if he knew what he was doing or what, but that's something that he did back in the day. So, but yeah, a lot of states will offer something like that. But see, that's a perfect example where, when I started, I didn't care what was going on in my soil. I was like, look, I got dirt and I'm fixing to plant in this dirt and it's going to grow. And if it's not going to grow and I started learning about fertilizer, then I'm just going to fertilize the crap out of it and I'm going to keep going. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
maybe I'm trying to figure out and I could be making this all up, but I kind of felt like I knew coming in that first year, like I'd seen bad soil, kind of like if you look at when sod is being put down or something, compared to like what I would now describe as a richness of the soil in that 30 by 44 foot spot. So I don't know if this is just my memory, not being accurate, or if I kind of knew like, okay, this looks good to plant in, or maybe my grandparents, as they came over, they, said, okay, this is good soil to plant in. If I just can't believe I woke up one morning and said, oh yeah, this looks good. There may have been like leaning back to, at home, my grandmother would do like potted plants, outside every year. So maybe there's a little bit of that spilled over with like, I know what she's planting in,
Well, I remember when I started, I was listening to this podcast years ago. Podcasts weren't even really a thing yet. And I don't know what the name of it was. It was a survivalist guy. He was preparing for the end of the world. And he would get on there and rant. But he did a lot of gardening, as most people that do that kind of stuff do. And I remember him saying, I'm not making a raised bed. And I was just getting into like my own gardens and stuff like that. My grandfather always grew in ground. That's what I grew up around. Raised beds were like the rage. They still are. And I remember him saying, like, why are you doing a raised bed? and he was like, I bet you think your soil is trash where you are. And I thought to myself, and I was like, yeah, I mean, it's topsoil, right? And he was like, then how do the trees grow? How does the grass grow? Why do you have the weeds that are taking over everything? Like, why does everything grow so well? Why do you need to put in that effort to do a raised bed just on the argument of like, hey, I've got bad soil? And so like I thought about it for a while, and, you know, clearly I was like, whatever, screw this guy. I'm still going to do a raised bed. But as years and years have passed, I almost agree with the gentleman about that. Is like, why are we doing raised beds all the time? Like, how do we know that our soil's bad if we're not testing it and we don't know? You know, who cares what it looks like? Like, you can have the prettiest looking soil in the world and it just be contaminated with uranium. You know what I mean? Straight toxic. So it's one of those things like, and this is where the argument comes in that like sometimes an evolving garden can be a headache, because then you start making it way more complicated than it has to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely, so I've told you this before, that first garden space, I can remember like maybe having a bag of something, like a bag of soil I picked up from, you know, the store, and putting fresh soil after working up the soil that was already there, the dirt that was already there, putting in some fresh dirt from the bag in like each planting hole. Like I can remember doing that in, you know, those first couple of years. But whether or not in 2008, if I even like understood the concept of raised beds and, you know, the potential pros around it, I don't know. But I grew in that soil, and it's still the same soil that's inside of the cage baby, plus everything I've added over the years. But I look back and say time, material, expenses, you know, alone makes you think, are we really overcomplicating, you know, the garden? Now, we always say this, you know, I used to follow a YouTuber that was in Chicago, and he kind of showed the progression of working on his soil and improving it in like one particular bed. So we know that over time you can get to a place where your soil is either as good or better than whatever that soil dump you're going to pay for is. You know, like we know that that's possible, but I think it's a matter of how long do you want to wait? Yeah. You know, and when I look and say, you know, I still go back to the front yard garden, and the backyard, it is what it is. Like I couldn't garden on the patio without raised beds. The cage baby, I just love, right? For all the woes from 2022, I still love it, you know. But then the front yard, again, I think it looks great. You know, I designed it. I think it looks great. But I could still go back to, gosh, this thing, I could start with a clean slate quite literally if I just had the soil there every year and plant out in different rows, mark off different rows. Yeah. And there absolutely would be an expense savings there. I'm not sure how I would have managed like the soil that after I dug up my sod, what that looks like. You know, like maybe I wouldn't have had the bounty, if you will, you know, in 2019, the first year of the front yard garden. Maybe I would just be getting there. So I said all that. I don't have any regrets, but it does kind of go back to I got, you know, hooked to a particular method, meaning raised beds, and it only made sense for me to use that when I expanded. Right. Right. That's how my mind was wired when it came to that. But if I had expanded to the front yard garden, let's say in 2009 or 2010, maybe it just would be in ground.
Yeah, I know when I started my wild garden, I know everybody's like, oh, here we go hearing about the wild garden, but
my favorite.
This is actually particularly in this, like it was in ground. And I remember the first year I had a 50-pound watermelon come out of that garden. Mm-hmm. And not only that, I had tomatoes that were just growing to beat the band, but I also had weeds that were growing to beat the band as well. And I did nothing to that soil at all, but just I tilled it and I planted it. And I mean, clearly I tilled up every weed seed that's been on this planet at the same time and brought them to the surface and then nourished them to health. And, you know, it was amazing. But, you know, that 50-pound watermelon rings very true into my mind, because guess how many times I've gotten a 50-pound watermelon with the same seeds since then? It hadn't happened. So, you know, I find it very funny that it was like, an in-ground bed with no amending at all, in which I got this huge watermelon out of it. So, there's the argument is there that once you start evolving and you start using new products and testing new things, that possibly you could be overcomplicating it to an extent.
And I think I'd say in some instances, to your detriment.
Yeah.
Complicating it to your detriment.
Yeah. So if I had
to the detriment of your garden.
Yeah. So, I mean, like if I had to go back, knowing what I know now, when I started the wild garden 4 years ago, and it's tough. I don't know if I would have put raised beds in. I think I would have just kept working that soil for years and years until I got it the way I wanted it. But I didn't do that. And so now I have this situation on my hands, which, I mean, so far it's doing great. There's no issues at all. But, it just, I don't know if I would change anything from the original year because I have to keep thinking about that. I mean, when you get a 50-pound watermelon, you've done something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
This is what I know, when I talk about like, it would be what an experience if I had, again, raised beds in the backyard and then just in the ground in the front yard. The entire front yard is mine to grow in. But I know that year one, I would have struggled. Maybe I would have held the line on year two, but if I would have continued to struggle, I would have said, nope, I'm going to go back to what I know, which at that time would have been growing in raised beds, getting some soil, delivered or purchased or whatever have you, Maybe it wouldn't be kind of the metal raised beds or whatever, maybe it'd be a little bit different, but I don't know if I would have had the stick-to-itiveness, if those early years of doing now what's a kind of not even new to me, like reverting back to a method that I did originally. Because I felt like I had success in those first years, 08, 09, and so on, with just in ground. Then I had success with raised beds, and that became the way. And then if I would have went to the front yard and said, okay, no, we're just going to go with in ground. Again, primarily only because of the soil. I saw the soil when I dug up the grass. Like, I know the level of how much it was compacted. I always had crap grass, so it wasn't like my grass was lush.
Right.
I wasn't doing anything with it, of course. And so I can imagine the struggle I would have had with growing food that first year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, look, if you go and you dig up your soil and you got nothing but rocks, you need to do something about that. If you've got nothing but clay, like, something needs to be done about it. We have a lot of sand here. So we have to do something about that. But that doesn't mean, dude, there's farms all around me. And, they don't have raised beds in their farms. They've got many, many fields of stuff growing. So it's possible. It's just, it depends. And then I think one of the other things, too, is once you start getting into it more and more, like each year you progress more and more, I think our patience wanes a little bit. And I think we just want to have, like, we want to make sure that, like, hey, this is going to be a good year. Mm-hmm. I only get this certain time to grow, and I've grown to really love this, so I'm going to love it to death. And then we just try to constantly, like, basically you're working it to death. You don't just let nature do what it's supposed to do. Because we're learning about different techniques all the time. You can learn about gardening a million ways. Now, it used to only be you go to the library or you ask an old timer. That was the only way to learn about gardening. Now it's like you can get information anywhere, and some of it's good, some of it's bad, some of it's correct, some of it's not, and some of it is pertinent to you, and some of it has nothing to do with you.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because we continue to introduce things to our garden experience, and I don't know, I won't say more often than not, but sometimes it's felt, it's met with what we may deem a failure, right? And it's kind of funny. It doesn't stop us from saying we're going to try something new, generally. There's still that, for most of us, I'd say, there's still the desire to say, okay, I'm going to either keep on trying at this thing, because you know how I can get about some things, like, I'm not going to let it beat me.
Yeah.
And then in other cases, it's like, either I'm going to continue to try that thing and I'm going to try something else new. The desire to expand. And I don't think that you set out to say I'm going to evolve. That's not the way that you look at it.
No.
Those aren't the words you use, but that's what you are doing. The one piece that I think about sometimes, especially when we're coming out of the last of winter now, is every now and again you'll see a comment from someone that says, I used to grow in this part of the country, now I'm growing in this part of the country, and it's totally different.
Yeah.
And I think about everything I know about gardening is gardening in Chicago, and how different my experience would be in some other area. And I know and believe that a lot of the skills that I've gained over the years are going to be transferable. But I mean, weather is weather, boy.
Well, and I mean, timing is everything. Like here, timing is everything.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lot of leeway where you are. So, if my cabbages aren't in at a certain time, like I don't have a chance in getting a cabbage. So that's kind of the big issue there, But for you, I mean, when did you plant your cabbages?
I haven't planted yet this year, but last year I planted last week of April.
Yeah, see, we've already got ours in. We planted ours in the first week of February. So, but if you missed that, that's all she wrote. I mean, it's 85 degrees today. And it's still February, But it'll be 60 or 50 degrees in a couple days. So, you have to be prepared for that kind of stuff. But is there a variety that you've tried that just totally backfired on you, that you're just like, I wish I would have never tried this variety? Like you were trying to solve a problem or something like that, and by doing that?
No, that's a complicated question. I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Like my attempt to move me to a different, to do something different, and in turn it backfired. So there's a second year of failure. No, I mean, that couldn't exist in my world.
Oh, it'd be great to be in Batavia's world. Yeah, for me, it was the year I planted national pickling cucumbers. That really backfired on me. And it's funny, ever since then, I haven't had a good year of cucumbers since.
Oh, yeah.
So hopefully we can fix that this year. But, that was one of the issues I had is I was like, well, I want a little bit bigger cucumber, so I'm not going to grow my usual Boston pickling cucumbers. So I planted the national pickling cucumber, and I did not know that they were like super susceptible to the cucumber beetle, and they were just riddled, and it's just, I had nothing but problems the whole year with it. If I would have known any better, I wouldn't have. So like at some point it's like, well, should you mess with success? And I think as a gardener, we have to, when we make the decisions to get the seeds and start the gardens and stuff like that, we need to take a step back and just look at it and say like, hey, should I mess with this? Should I change this? Or should I, what's the real reason why I'm planting something different? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And that also leads to how much, again, going back to how much change you introduce in a particular garden season. Because sometimes it's hard to keep track of what really was the cause of a particular issue.
Yeah. It could be a lot of things. It could be a lot of things. But I think over time you start, it's like last year I recognized that I had an irrigation issue. So then this year I've made that change. So then I can kind of eliminate that once I figure out how that runs. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. So the question is, should we evolve our gardens? What's your final answer?
Absolutely.
I think so too.
Every year and twice in some years.
Carefully though, and slowly.
Yeah.
So you heard it here, people. We're going to evolve our gardens. We're going to continue to do so. But in the meantime, you can support us on Patreon. You can come join us on Facebook, or you can check out any of the affiliate links below to help get yourself a discount and help support the show at no extra cost to you. And until next time, continue to learn to grow and grow for change.
See ya.
Now you know why people feel like celebrating at harvest time.
All over the world, people have feasting and good times when the crops have been gathered in.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for checking out the Backyard Gardens podcast.
If you like what we're doing and you want to continue to support the podcast, head over to our Patreon page to sign up.
You can also make a one-time donation using PayPal. Both of these links are in the description.
With your support, we can continue growing and helping others in their gardens. See ya.
If you guys want some Backyard Gardens gear,
Go to the link below and check out our t-shirts, mugs, pint glasses, and other gear.
all purchases go towards helping to support the show, so thank you so much in advance, and we hope you enjoy. We want everybody to have a garden, and we're going to give you a chance to win free seeds every month.
Head over to backyardgardenstv.com and enter your email address to be entered in all of our giveaways.
Good luck!
We want you to be a part of our gardening community. DM us a picture of your garden at Backyard Gardens TV on Instagram, and we will share it with our listeners.